All right. Are you all ready?
Yes.
Okay. So first I'm going to introduce myself. I am Grace Sirk and I'm working with
Sarah Williams.
and we are going to be doing our presentation on Socratic Seminar for EXED 520. So let's first examine what is Socratic Seminar.
So Socratic Seminar, what is it? Let's start with an opening question. So have you heard the word dialect before? How about dialogue? What do these words mean? Can you give an example? Feel free to pause the video here and answer the questions before we move on. All right, so this over here is Socrates. So Socrates had a theory of knowledge that was based in the word dialectic, which is pretty similar to dialect or dialogue. So dialectic means the practice of examining opinions or ideas logically, often by the method of question or answer to determine their validity. So this process begins with people discussing a problem and having dialogue. And through the dialogue, they clarify their ideas, which helps them to come to a final outcome of what was meant. So this process is now used in schools in the form of Socratic Seminar.
So now let's look at the history and evidence base. So instead of just simply Socrates stating his knowledge about what he knew, he wanted his students to ask questions in order to figure out the answer. Socrates became the student and his students became the teacher. And Q&A has been used by teachers for centuries. Can you even imagine a world if the teacher didn't ask you any question? So why should we use questions? By asking questions, it builds automaticity and takes students less working memory, meaning they're able to maintain the information and remember for their projects, exams, and world experience. So when should we use this in content you might teach? It can be used throughout all the disciplines. These are the four main disciplines we have: English, mathematics, history, and science. So for English, maybe you could discuss something with character development or plot construction and research and have discussions about that. For mathematics, we could discuss how to solve an equation, figure out proofs, or discuss theory. And for history, we can analyze primary sources and discuss them, historical events, and even current events that are happening now. And for science, either a lab report, theories, or the scientific method in discussion. And when to use it. So what material it works best with. So with all these disciplines, for English, you can use novels, articles, plays. In mathematics, you would use equations, derive questions from geometry, algebra, or even real world examples in mathematics. For history, moral dilemmas, propaganda analysis, or current political scenarios. In science, lab report findings on the chemicals you mix, and even current events related to science as well. So the elements you have to include, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. You must have a material to discuss and ask questions about. 2, you must conduct a discussion. And 3, you must have a reflection of the discussion after it has concluded to understand the purpose of the discussion and maybe solve an answer.
So now let's talk about the steps to Socratic Seminar. First step is choose a text. Second, students prepare. Third, set expectations. Fourth, opening question. Fifth, discussion. And sixth, reflection. So how can we remember these steps? We can use this mnemonic. Choose Socratic Seminar, okay? Differentiation rocks. Now it's your turn to practice remembering the steps. Pause the video between every step and see if you can remember the mnemonic. Let's practice. Choose a text. Socratic, students prepare. Seminar, set expectations. Okay, opening question. Differentiation, discussion. Rocks, reflection. Okay, let's take a look at each of the steps individually. Step 1, choose a text. Let's go over what questions you should be asking yourself when picking a text. What subject matter should the text be about? It can be about anything from literature to science and math. What features should the text have? Your text needs to promote thinking and discussion. It shouldn't be too straightforward and should require deep textual analysis from students. How long should it be? It depends on how much time you're giving your students. Take note of your students' reading levels and speeds and give them enough time to be able to read and analyze the text. Step 2, students prepare. Here we're talking about 3 things. First, time. Students need to know about the Socratic Seminar with enough time in advance to prepare. Second, question. You should provide your students with your essential or guiding question for your lesson. Third, analyze. Students need to analyze their text ahead of time to be prepared. Let's go over some analysis strategies that you could teach your students. First, they should pre-read and ask themselves some pre-reading questions. Second, they should mark their text for important keywords, events, etc. Third, they should make annotations. This might look like writing notes or leaving stickies to remember to come back to a page during the seminar. Fourth, they need to expand their knowledge. This is when they should be developing their questions for the seminar. Here are some examples of ways that you can help your students to analyze their text with graphic organizers. Step 3, set expectations. You will need to share your expectations for how the seminar will run. Remind students that they need to be prepared, be polite, and participate. Some of these expectations include having their text with them, talking to each other and respecting each other's opinions, and building on what other people say while referencing the text. Here are some examples of expectations and guidelines that you might share with your students. Pay special attention to the second example, which talks about dialogue versus debate. Remember that a seminar should be a respectful conversation of sharing ideas, not a heated argument. Step 4, opening question. When the seminar actually begins, students are going to get into a circular formation and the teacher is going to kick off the seminar by asking an essential question. Let's look at some examples of essential questions if you're not sure where to start. Remember that these questions should be open-ended and spark discussion. What do you think this text means? This text is really about, what is the theme of this text? What does this text ask us to do? What assumptions does this text make? Step 5, discussion. Now for the meat and bones of the seminar. During this time, the teacher has asked the opening question already. The role of the teacher past the opening question is not to be a participant in the seminar, as a seminar is intended to be student-led. However, if there is a lull in conversation, the conversation gets to surface level, or students are starting to argue rather than discuss, the teacher might want to step in to guide the conversation forward. While the students are talking, the teacher should be tracking their participation. Now let's talk about the student's role. Students should come prepared so that they can participate in the conversation. While others are speaking, they should listen actively and have an open mind about their classmates' opinions. While they're speaking, they should respond thoughtfully to what their peers are saying and reference their text to support their responses whenever they can. They should also make sure they're allowing everyone to participate, not taking up too much time for themselves. Here are some examples of response guidelines that you can give your students if they are stuck on how to participate in the conversation. Lastly, step 6, reflection. In their reflections, students should reflect on how their understanding of the text changed as a result of the seminar and on the seminar experience itself. You as a teacher should give them prompts to help them through the reflection process. Let's look at some examples of reflection prompts for a seminar. How would I rate my performance? How comfortable was I with this format? What might I do differently next time? How has my understanding of the text changed? What questions do I have now as a result of the discussion? What connections can you make? Here are some examples of reflection templates for students. You could ask students to simply give themselves a numerical rating, or you could ask them to answer some short answer questions. Okay, so those were the steps to a Socratic seminar. Now let's look at what they might actually look like in a classroom. Before we start, remember the mnemonic. Choose Socratic Seminar, okay? Differentiation rocks. Step 1, choose a text. So let's say that I'm the teacher in this situation. I'm going to pick the text Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Why might I choose this? To start, I'm teaching a literature class. I also know that this book promotes thinking, discussion, and questioning because it has so many different interpretations. It's also not too long, so I think my students could read it and analyze it in time for the seminar. So what are my students doing during this process? My students are doing a pre-assessment for readiness. They're being given some terms and for themes and devices used in the book. Students might be able to define some of these terms, but I wouldn't expect them to know them all at the pre-assessment, which is why this isn't graded. Advanced students may be able to provide examples for some of the terms. I will use this to see who I may need to scaffold and differentiate for prior to the seminar. Step 2, students prepare. So I'm giving my students the whole unit to read and analyze this book. My unit is going to be about 3 weeks, and I'm going to tell them about the upcoming seminar in the beginning. I'm also going to give them my essential question, which is, why is this novel called The Metamorphosis? If my learners are unfamiliar with the seminar format or struggling with material, this would be the first question I use in the seminar, since students are familiar with it and it can help ease their nerves. I can also scaffold here. For learners who are struggling, I might give them more essential questions to help guide their reading. I should also show students techniques to help them analyze their texts. For learners who are struggling, I can scaffold by filling in some of the preparation materials for them, or I could give them a graphic organizer to use. Now for the students' roles. At this point, students should be analyzing their texts. Let's look at some of the ways that they can analyze. So here you can see that they underlined an important part of the text, which is when Gregor transformed into a vermin. They're also going to activate their background knowledge. They might know that vermin is a type of animal. They're also going to number the paragraphs so that it's easy to find the quote that they're looking for. They're going to circle all key words. Transformed here is a key word. They're also going to write notes in the margin, like questions. Why was he agitated? Then they're going to use sticky notes. This can help them come back to it in seminar. So they're going to note the page, the paragraph, and what happened. They're also going to expand by writing their discussion questions. This student wrote, what is the significance of describing Gregor as a vermin? Step 3, expectations. A great thing to do to visually support your expectations and hold students accountable for them is to develop a learning contract. The teacher would create this contract with expectations for their students, discuss it with students, and then sign it. If learners are unfamiliar with the seminar format, I might show them a video of other students modeling the process. During this time, students are also discussing the learning contract with the teacher and signing it. They can also use this as an opportunity to ask questions about what the seminar might be like. Step 4, opening question. So remember, my opening question is, why is the novel called Metamorphosis? I will ask students the question, and then I'm going to take the back seat and let the students lead. I'm only jumping in if it's necessary. Students are the real drivers in the car right now. Here's a student who has marked their text and is ready to answer the opening question. This student will respond to the teacher. On page 1, it says that Gregor transformed. I'm curious to know why Kafka used the term vermin to describe what Gregor transformed into. Her classmates can take that as an opportunity to respond and keep the conversation flowing. So now we're into the actual discussion. Remember, during this time, the teacher should be overseeing and not participating. The teacher should be tracking student responses as they go. Here's an example of what that might look like. To differentiate here, one way that the teacher can guide the conversation is through silent coaching. This is a method in which the teacher leaves sticky notes on the student's desk during the seminar to help them out. It can be used for both compliments and constructive feedback. For students who are really strong participants but are taking up a little bit too much airtime, the teacher might leave them a reminder to let others speak. For participants who are too nervous or not participating, the teacher might leave them a recommendation for ways in which they can respond. Now let's look at an example of a great discussion between students John, Sarah, and Grace. John says, I think that the family was holding on to hope that Gregor would return to normal. What do you guys think? Sarah says, I disagree with John because in chapter 4, Gret says that they must get rid of Gregor's furniture. Grace says, I understand your point, Sarah, and I want to add that this seemed to be a turning point in Gregor's family's sympathy for him. Our last step is reflection. During this time, the teacher is going to give students feedback on their participation. Here's a rubric example for how you might grade students. Let's say I'm going to give this student a B. I'm not only going to provide them a grade, I'm also going to give them constructive feedback for future seminars. The students at this point should be reflecting on their understanding of the text and experience after the seminar. Let's look at an example of a self-rating numerical scale, an experience-based question, and an understanding-based question. So first, the student is giving themselves a numerical rating. Then they're identifying a personal goal. And this student wants to encourage her classmates to speak next seminar. They also can do an understanding question, like identifying and explaining a connection to another text of their choice. She says that the Metamorphosis is similar to The Stranger because they're both existentialist novels. We use many evaluations throughout this lesson. In the beginning, we did a pre-assessment for readiness. During the seminar, the teacher was tracking student responses and silently coaching students. After, the teacher filled out a rubric for students while students evaluated their participation. While we did use these evaluations, there are a lot of other evaluation options that could have been used. Before the seminar, we could have given a pre-assessment for interest or learning profile. We also could have done a question review, which is a great idea for learners who are new to the seminar format. In a question review, the students hand in their questions ahead of time for feedback from the teacher. The teacher lets them know what questions are appropriate for the seminar and which questions might need to be improved or taken out. During the seminar, students could track their own responses in addition to the teacher tracking them. In addition, you could use partner tracking. For partner tracking, you would need to switch the format of the seminar so that there was an inside circle and an outside circle. Students would partner up with a student on the inside circle and one on the outside. Students in the inside circle would participate in the seminar, while students on the outside track the responses of their partner. Halfway through the class period, the partners would switch roles. After the seminar, students could do differentiated reflection activities, which we'll discuss in the next section. The whole class might also do dialogue mapping, in which the teacher or student draws lines between speakers during the seminar. After, the class would discuss whether the appropriate amount of students spoke and whether there was enough variety in dialogue.
So let's review. Take a pause and look at the questions on the screen. What is it? What's the purpose? What are the steps? So what is it? First, we have its dialectic, meaning that we are taking opinions and we're using question and answer to give them validity. Next, we have questioning, asking our students and asking each other what's happening. And we're sharing opinions and ideas. That's the whole point of a discussion. And remember that Socratic Seminar is used in all content areas. So for purpose, it builds automaticity. We want our students to be able to retain the information and tell us all about it. So to do that, they will ask questions of students and ask for opinions. And with these opinions, they have a dialogue and a discussion. And then they will reflect on how the conversation went. So the steps: choose a text, students prepare, set expectations, have an opening question, and have a discussion, and finally reflect. So how can you differentiate it?
So let's talk about differentiating within the Socratic Seminar method, which means we're still using the Socratic Seminar, but we're differentiating some of the aspects of it. One way that we can differentiate within the method is by differentiating the content, which is the material that the seminar is based off of. We can differentiate this by interest, readiness, or learning profile. We can also differentiate the product, which is the reflection that the students do after the seminar. We can differentiate this for interest, readiness, or learning profile as well.
So for differentiating context for interest, we must have students draw from their own experiences in order to make the critical connections. So all students need to be working with the same text during the seminar. So how can we differentiate it? Well, you can ask these questions to your students and think about what they might respond with. What extracurricular activities do my students participate in? What books do my students read outside of school? What sports do my students participate in? What organizations are students a part of outside of school? What organizations are my students a part of during school? And what hobbies do my students like to participate in? All these questions and experiences can help with our discussion.
The requirement of the seminar is that all students have to be referencing the same text. So if they have to reference the same text, how can we change the same text to differentiate for readiness? Well, the honest answer is that you can't in order for it to be a true Socratic seminar. So what you can do is provide more support for struggling learners in accessing that text or understanding it. One way to do this is through graphic organizers, like a KWL chart. This helps students to guide their reading and to visualize their thoughts. This can help comprehension and analysis skills. You could also prime student background knowledge. For example, let's say you're reading a novel about World War II. It might be a good idea to quickly review the history of World War II before the seminar to get everyone on the same page. You could also do a picture analysis for visual learners and have a discussion ahead of time. Another method is using differentiated versions of the text. This would not take the place of the text, but would be a supplemental text to help with comprehension for struggling learners, especially for texts like Shakespeare, where it can be really hard to know what's going on. This picture is an example of an adapted book for learners with severe disabilities, which my friends who studied the adapted curriculum are probably familiar with. You might also give an example of the text with the lower Lexile level, a video summary of the text, a picture book version, or a version in someone's native language. Next, you could scaffold your materials. So here's a questioning document that we looked at earlier. For struggling learners, you might fill in some of these sections to give them some support, or may start a question and have them finish it. Advanced learners may not need the template at all. You could also use familiarity for struggling learners by having your opening question be one that you provided to them ahead of time. Lastly, you could do some vocabulary support in which you give the students important vocabulary words in the text and give them the definition to help them out.
So what about differentiating content for the learning profiles? So these are some questions that we might ask ourselves. How do my students learn the best? And can Socratic seminars look different than just a regular classroom discussion? The answer is yes. And how can I appeal to auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learners? For my auditory folks, having discussions in person and addressing others by name when speaking, but also everyone takes notes to continue with the talking points could be a good way to let students flourish in the discussion. For visual, having a live discussion but putting notes up on the board. Padlet, Jamboard, and concept maps make this easy. They can reference it at any time and have their notes readily available. And for our kinesthetic learners, have roles within the discussion and switch. Get kids out of their seat and use the online component like a teacher-student friendly chat room. I used to do this when I was in high school. Our teacher would always have a chat room available for the outside circle while the inside peers would discuss the information and then we'd switch. It was a great way to get out of my seat, but also I could use online component and also discuss with my friends.
In addition to differentiating the content, you can also differentiate the product, which is a way to show students what they learned, or a way for students to show what they learned. To differentiate the product for interests, you could ask student in their reflections to identify and explain a connection to a book, a song, a movie or show, a piece of artwork, or another class of their choice. It is important that it be of their choice so that they can use their interest to answer the question. And looking at Bloom's taxonomy, this is the analyzing level in which the learner makes use of the information in a context different than the one in which it was learned.
So next we have differentiating product for readiness. This can also be discussed with Bloom's taxonomy in the remembering level. Before they reflect after the Socratic seminar, ask students to remember a conversation they had and explain how it affected them. This gets them ready for the actual reflection after the discussion. You can ask questions like, did the conversation make you feel a certain way? If there was a problem, question, was it solved? How did you communicate during the conversation? And who was your conversation with? And to differentiate these ways of letting them reflect, you could have a photo collage using pictures to describe how the conversation made them feel, who was it with, how did they communicate, Or you could have a fill in the blank organizer for students that need a little extra support but still have all the crucial information.
There are lots of ways for students to reflect on their learning. So let's look at how you can differentiate this reflection for expression style. So here are some examples of common expression styles: artistic, computer, audiovisual, manipulative, written, oral, audiovisual, and dramatization. So how might we differentiate our reflection activities for them? For our learners in blue here, we might ask them to make a PowerPoint showing what they learned and how they participated. For our learners in yellow, they might be asked to write a reflection essay. For our learners in pink, they could answer the same questions in a video format, like an iMovie. Remember that the evaluative criteria for all of these products is the same. We're just allowing them to show the same information in different ways. And looking at Bloom's taxonomy, this is the evaluating level, which asks students to make decisions based on in-depth reflection, criticism, and assessment.
So, differentiating outside of the teaching method. So, we've chosen Think, Pair, Share to connect with Socratic Seminar. And this Think, Pair, Share could be used before Socratic Seminar to test if questions are strong and students understand the material. So, for Think, teacher asks questions to think about relating to the topic instead of the students. That's supporting them so they don't have to think of the questions right just yet. Pair, have them pair off and discuss the questions and try to come up with an answer as two. And then for share, students can share with another group of two instead of the whole class like they would be doing with the Socratic Seminar. And the teacher can monitor struggling groups and adjust questions if needed.
So a management strategy that you might consider using with the Socratic Seminar is a learning contract. A learning contract is a written explanation of responsibilities written by the teacher and discussed with students, in which students pledge to engage in positive learning behaviors. This method is great to use with Socratic Seminar because it's in a student-led activity. You want to be sure that your students are meeting your expectations for behavior and are being responsible for their self-guided learning. So why use learning contracts? Well, they're a way to manage the behavior of your students before, during, and after the seminar. So first, we have the statement of purpose. This applies to the whole process because they're agreeing to all of the steps to help them participate. Now let's look at the student actions. Notice how some of the actions, such as reading, happen before the seminar, some, such as listening, happen during the seminar, and some, such as reflection, happen after. This is also a great tool because both the teacher and student sign it. So if students aren't following the contract, you can gently remind them that they signed it and they signed that they would follow it. Another management strategy you could use is cooperative group learning. Cooperative group learning is structured group learning in which the roles are assigned to each member of the group, but they're being assessed using the same criteria and have the same goal. Let's look at why this is a great strategy to use with Socratic Seminar. So here's a unique configuration of a Socratic Seminar called a triad formation. In the triad, one learner, the pilot, is in the center circle talking, while their two co-pilots, or the other cooperative group members, are outside the circle doing their individual roles to help the group. What might these roles be? They could be the presenter, which is the student in the seminar itself. They could be the recorder, recording what the presenter is saying or any important comments made during the seminar. They could be the data collector, collecting data on who their pilot is talking to and what kind of contributions they're making. They could be the elaborator, looking for quotes and references in the text to help support the pilot. They could also be the summarizer, summarizing what happened during the seminar for their group. This strategy is great to use with Socratic Seminar because in a big class, sometimes having all the students participate in the seminar at once is too overwhelming. This strategy can help keep the circle smaller while still giving other classmates a role to do while the seminar is going on so that they're not just watching.
So here's our first set of references. And here's our references continued. Thank you so much for listening on our discussion of Socratic Seminar. We hope you learned a lot. Thanks again. Bye-bye.